Okay, today I have a really special guest. I'm really excited about this. I'm speaking to Andrew Kilpatrick from Kilpatrick Audio. This is a phenomenally talented guy and someone who's doing work in modular synthesis and just synthesizer development that I find really, really exciting. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm great.
Awesome.
Thanks for taking the time out to do this.
No problem.
It's kind of late on a Tuesday evening, so just my listeners get a chance to understand when we're doing this.
Exactly.
I have got about 1 million questions already, but I try and honor a tradition here at the podcast, which is to say that my first question is to ask you to give me some information about your background and how you've come to do the things you do. So what I should introduce you a little more clearly. What you do is you create synthesizer modules. You started off in the Euro world.
Yep.
Then you developed your own format.
That's right.
And now you're actually looking at building a standalone device of some sort too, right?
Yeah, that's really, really new. It just was announced this past week.
Right. So with that, what is your background and how did you get to the point of being a modular synth designer?
The story is a little bit roundabout. I mean, I've been doing music since I was really, really young. I studied violin since I was 3, like Suzuki violin and stuff like that.
Okay.
And went to an art school in my public school from grades 6 to 8, and got involved in every aspect of performing arts basically. But I was always doing technology as well, computer programming and playing with electronics and things like that. And I was lucky enough to go to a high school that had an electronics department. So I kind of soaked in as much knowledge as I could from the teachers that were there. And there was this one teacher who was really amazing and sort of gave me special things to work on because I was sort of like, I would just stay after school and keep doing more projects and things. And sort of my academic career wasn't as maybe good as I would have hoped in terms of like pure science and math. So I had been studying voice for a while, like operatic singing. And so when it came time to go to university, my parents said, you got to go to university. So I couldn't do engineering or computer science because I didn't really have the grades for that. So I went into music instead, in voice performance in London, Ontario, in Canada, at the University of Western Ontario, and I did 3 years there. I didn't really finish my degree. I kind of got what I wanted out of it. Right. And realized that a paper wasn't going to do anything for me in terms of what I wanted to do next. And so I was always doing music and audio and technology and electronics stuff all the time. I did a lot of sound for live performances. I did shows and festivals and things, running a soundboard operator and doing that kind of stuff. And so I kind of got into technology in the early 2000s because it seemed like the thing to do, and a lot of my friends were getting into that. And so I just sort of worked on all kinds of different projects, mostly hardware and embedded projects, doing digital advertising, like digital signage. I had a company for a while doing stuff in the lighting control area, and kind of I always wanted to combine music and audio and electronics together in my own products, but it just, at that time, everyone was really getting into like software synthesizers, and I'm not really a math guy, so that didn't seem like my thing. And it sort of took until the hardware thing started to become popular again for me to see that there was like a place for me to do my thing with all the sort of background and interests that I had. So, fast forward a few jobs and a few different types of projects later, and I found myself kind of doing the stuff in the evenings. I had a little studio in like a rock and roll building, which was awful. And I just would go there, and I had my lab set up, and I would work on guitar effects, pedals, and amps and things, and realized I needed to sort of focus on music electronics as a full-time job. So I quit my job and I sold my apartment, and that let me live for a year and a half or so to figure out exactly what I was doing. And the rest is history, as they say.
Sure. So when I go to your website, I notice in sort of the list of discontinued products, a whole series of guitar pedals. Mm-hmm. Were those the first things that you created?
I sort of, the first thing I worked on when I decided I wanted to, seriously pursue doing like an actual like formal business. The only reason I did a business, I'm not much of a business person, in terms of being good at that. But I just wanted to sort of have a formal outlet for the work I was doing. And at that time, I was playing a lot of guitar, and I kind of, what really, started everything, which is kind of a bit funny, actually, is I had a Fender Hot Rod Deluxe amp, and I took it to the cottage, and the reverb tank broke. It must have just like fallen apart in the car. And I was like, oh, darn, my reverb's broken. And then I started looking around for what I could replace it with, like a pedal or something, because I didn't really ever like the spring sound too much.
Right.
And I saw, okay, you know what? There's reverb pedals, but I thought it would be neat to have a delay pedal too. And there was nothing on the market at the time that kind of did what I wanted. And so I'd sort of been toying with the idea of working on some audio circuits, and I kind of just decided I would just make my own. And that's kind of... then I realized, oh wait, maybe I could like do these as a product, because I'd built other like manufactured electronics before, not for myself.
Right.
I did a product, I did a whole bunch of like in-house projects and things for a company that I'd been working for before. So it seemed sort of natural that I would call up my metal guy, call up PCB assemblers, and figure out how I could put something together. And then I started making the kind of guitar effects that I wanted in my own setup. And, they didn't sell very well at first. It's hard to figure out how to get those out. I did end up getting most of my sales through a store in Toronto that was really good, and they ordered a lot of them. But yeah, that's kind of got me going and made me realize that this was like something really, that was perfectly suited to my personality or whatever.
That's really interesting. Now, I have to say, I have gone through the process of manufacturing exactly one item, which was based on my master's thesis. I did a little module that called the Ardcore that embeds an Arduino in a module, right? And when you say something like, well, I just called my metal guy and I called my PC fab guy, you have to understand that for me, I'm just overwhelmed by what you just said there.
Well, it doesn't come easy, let me tell you.
Yeah,
it's
okay.
Like, this isn't, I'd been working in the industry for a long time doing basically electronics engineering and metal enclosures and various things, packaging for electronics. I was doing things like, like mall displays, like for LCD screens and things. So I sort of had a sense of, I'm not an artist per se in terms of like industrial design, but I kind of just did it till I got good at it.
Sure, you knew how to pull the pieces together.
I knew how to see if something looked good, and I knew how to sort of and after a while, I think doing that, you started figure out what the materials can do for you in terms of sheet metal, for instance. You start to get a sense of what stuff's expensive, what kind of things people kind of gripe about when you send them your drawings. And I started going through that process and trying to figure out, how can I use this for my own, ideas instead of just doing things for other people. And I think I think it's having had a lot of different experiences working for different kinds of organizations and doing different types of work, I think, you end up with a series of skills. Like I know a lot of people who, they don't think about it like that probably because they're right in the heat of the moment. But later on, whenever a young person asks me like, well, what should I do? I tell them like, do lots of things.
Right.
Because, it's you always draw on those experiences later. And you think, oh, well, I need to make an enclosure. Well, okay, I already know how to do that. I can use 3D CAD, and I know this guy west of the city, and, this company that makes stuff at a good price, and the quality is really good. So, and those are the kinds of, those are industry contacts, and kind of knowing like how it goes and how much it will cost, and sort of be able to estimate things like that. That stuff is really valuable, and you can, like, the best way to do that is to do it for other people first, obviously,
right,
before you're spending your own money. So I kind of just drew together all the things that I'd been working on, and I felt like it was kind of like time in history in terms of everyone was starting to get into this. I'm not the only one, of course, and it was also, for me, it was the right time where I was kind of doing what I was doing and not that excited about it anymore, and sort of wanted something different. So, does that sort of paint a good picture as to?
It does, but it also paints a really good inspirational picture. I like this concept of telling people to do lots of things, because it's through those breadths of experience that you actually are able to kind of pivot into whatever your calling ends up being.
I think so. I think, like I've had, interns before doing engineering stuff, and I've met a lot of students. I'm part of a hackerspace community in Toronto.
Okay.
And so we get a lot of young people coming in saying, hey, this is really cool what you're doing. How do I do this? And, the biggest mistake I think people make, and it's not usually their fault, like, is young people are influenced often by their parents.
Right.
The parents see it as, you get your grades, you go to school, you get a degree, and then you're all set to go. But I think that's probably only part of it, really, and for some people, obviously that's zero part of it.
Right.
Some people just do stuff and learn how to make it happen. So for me, obviously I see there's value in education, and there's value in practical experience. But I think if you just focus only in one direction, you're not gonna get all the skills that you need to really do it. And to work for other people, you can really learn a lot by what people tell you when you're working on projects, and you can also learn a lot by what you work for a company. Maybe they don't do something the way you think it should be done. That's as good a learning experience as anything.
Right.
And
that's something.
This is ridiculous the way this is going. Like I could have done this better if I had these tools, or if I, if I had been allowed to use this technology or whatever. And then, so, you can sort of keep all those in the back of your mind. And then when it comes to doing your own project, there's no one telling you how to do it. You can, you can make all your own mistakes if you want, but you can hopefully learn from things that you've done for other things in the past.
So you mentioned having gone to a high school where there was an electronics lab or electronics classes and teachers that were into it. To what extent is that the framework that you kind of built all your later work on?
Interesting.
Because it seems like, you didn't do the university track into getting into electronics work. So was it really that kind of like set the base for you to be able to work from?
Interesting. Well, I went there specifically because I'd always been doing hobby projects. I'm sure you're familiar with these old books that they used to sell at Radio Shack.
The Sam's books,
Forrest M. Mims III.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I don't know anything about him, actually, but his books were sort of, really influential for me when I was a kid.
Sure.
I had ones that were even out of print that someone gave me, that had amazing, introductory circuits and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I sort of exceeded the capabilities of what like my teachers at school could teach me. So actually, when I was about 13, I decided to get a ham radio license, because I figured that I would learn about electronics from doing that. So I actually did like a night school course at the local college, and I think I was like the one of the youngest people in there. There was another kid whose uncle did it or something, and he came as well. So there was only two of us, and there was all these older folks. So my mom would drop me off, and I would go in there, and I took a trip to the big Ham Fest in Dayton, and kind of had my mind blown, and then realized that technology was, and radio stuff and electronics was like so amazing. And then the next year I was headed to high school, and so I chose a school that was basically like a technical school, specifically because they had this electronics program, and it was just amazing to be able to be around people like that. And the main teacher, who was actually like in charge of the department, he had worked in industry for big, I don't know, all the companies, I can't remember now, but he had worked in all kinds of things, and he did military stuff. He had been in the army and was doing electronics there. And so he had all these crazy stories. And if you just said, hey, I want to learn about this, he would know about it, or at least know enough to point you in the right direction. And I found that really inspiring. And so I think in terms of getting the groundwork, in terms of, all the basic theory and that kind of thing, that was really, sort of solidified it for me and made me have the confidence to do, more large scale projects later on. I mean, that was a bit too early in terms of learning all about embedded microcontrollers and things, because that stuff was, kind of came about a little later, and I taught myself, pick microcontrollers and things in university and then after that. But that was really, it sort of set the groundwork where I knew what everything was called. I knew how to do all the calculations, and, I knew where to look for information. And in those days, it was just before the internet was really sort of taking off. And so, I had a lot of magazines of different electronics things and books and stuff I would photocopy from the library and stuff like that. And sort of after, tons and tons of binders full of paper, and little jot notes and things, you learn the vocabulary, let's say,
right,
of how to sort of navigate that world.
Yeah, well, that is fascinating, and what a cool way to approach stuff, because a lot of times with electronics you find people who are just hungry to do it, so they'll sort of slap together just enough knowledge to be able to pull off the thing that they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Or in other cases, you'll get people who sort of had the 30-year grinder version of learning electronics.
Sure.
And eventually kind of throw up their hands and do the thing you want. I think it's interesting how you kind of like made your own path through the learning process to get kind of exactly what you wanted to do. Mm-hmm. That's neat.
My biggest regret is not discovering analog synthesizers back in those days.
Oh, right.
I would have been a lot further ahead, but things were different now.
Maybe you would have gone broke just like all of
maybe probably, but yeah. I mean, I was really interested in computer. I would do a lot of things with like building things that connected to PCs and stuff like that.
Right.
And in those days, that just seemed like sort of like science fiction.
Yeah, that was magic.
Turning on and off lights and motors and reading sensors, and before we had like flash microcontrollers easily available. It was like, dedicate a PC to doing a stupid task just for fun, right?
Right.
And later on when I found microcontrollers, that really kind of like, I realized, okay, this is the cool thing. And
sure.
There's so much potential there. But it was built obviously on the foundations that I got, in a proper program, learning about that in school.
Right. Well, let's talk about your move into the analog synthesis world, because I've had an opportunity to use several of your modules, particularly the 4815 pattern generator.
Yep.
And then the K16 MIDI converter, both of which were just like, first of all, fantastic build quality and stuff. They just felt so solid,
Thank you.
And the kind of modules that make you feel good about, just having them under your fingers. But
cool.
Particularly the pattern generator was one that really kind of blew my mind, because first of all, it has a very unique sort of like visible, almost like sculpture to it, with the dotted user interface and the I don't know. It's just I just found it very intriguing and very engaging. But also unlike anything that was around at the time.
Right, right.
How did you decide that the pattern generator, that was kind of one of your first
I think
modules,
it was the first.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd done a DIY synth, and which sort of got me thinking about all this stuff.
Okay.
And it just happened that, at a specific point, I was like, I need to do some new products. What am I going to do? The whole guitar pedal thing wasn't really going the way I wanted. And I had actually built this thing months before. My workshop used to be literally right next door to an electronics store, which is fairly rare in my town anyway. There's only a couple of shops that sell parts and things.
Sure.
And on the weekend, I decided that I would do, formal kind of business work stuff, working on my pedals and various other newer designs. I would do those in the weekdays, and after hours and on the weekends, I would just do whatever I wanted.
Okay.
So I was actually in this store, and they had this 8x8 LED matrix, much bigger than the one that's actually on the module. Mm-hmm. But I just thought, that's interesting, and I bought it. And within one weekend, I had built this little thing in like a project box with this display, and it just did MIDI. It wasn't CV or anything. And I just thought, what can I do with this? And I was like, my mind was in music stuff already anyway. So I thought, what if I did something with MIDI? And maybe this could do some sort of patterns or something like that. So I kind of just got something going really quickly. I had it scanning the display, and I put some MIDI ports on the back, and I had a few knobs, and I wasn't really even sure what they would do. And it's not the same, but it's like, the same concept of how the pattern generator actually turned out was this little box. And I played with it, and my friends played with it, and everyone thought it was kind of neat. And then I forgot about it for a while. And then when it came time to do some synth modules, I kind of kept wanting something that would just make notes, or some sort of different, changing voltages while I was tweaking my synths, or while I was working on some other projects. Like I wanted to build another oscillator, and I was doing some other things. I thought, maybe I should just make that somehow into a module. And I went through a whole bunch of different ideas and kind of came up with this concept of these layers of different elements that you would, or ingredients, I like to call them, right, that you would mix together, like a visual pattern. There's a motion. Below the whole thing is a scale. Like there's obviously some notes that are assigned to the various steps. Mm-hmm. And I kind of figured that would make a really interesting user interface, because most of the modules that I'd seen, I realized I couldn't start off by just making another oscillator or something, because there were a lot of people doing them better than I was doing them. And I was like, I need to do something that's kind of a good entry into this market, so people will sort of be excited about something. And I was really interested in the control side of things, and it kind of grew out of there. I thought maybe I can do something with this that sort of inspires people and makes unusual, maybe accidents that turn out to be interesting. And as I was testing it, I was coming across all these riffs and things that were like, oh, I've heard that in a song before, or oh, that's interesting, and it was just like I would just turn it on. It's interesting to look at, and I really like the connection between the visuals and the sound, which I think is part of the appeal.
I think you're right. Well, I think also that the pattern generator was the first device that I got a chance to use that was generative in nature, but it did not. It wasn't random. You really had the sense that you were controlling the results that you were developing. It may have been kind of a shaky connection of that control, but you just felt like, like you were driving the process, and I thought that was fascinating. And again, like I say, that's the first thing that I had run that had that sense. And I was really curious about your development process on that, because it had the feel of something that was a happy mistake.
And I, this little box, this weekend project that I did, sort of like, its second incarnation was the pattern generator, and it sort of seemed like a good place to start doing something. When everyone's going one way,
Right.
I like to go the other way.
Sure.
Just because it's like, it's more interesting to sort of try to break new ground and to sort of not just jump on the bandwagon. If I did that, I wouldn't probably be doing the kind of things that I'm doing. I'd still be in my job that I eventually left.
Right.
But it was interesting to sort of just take a different approach to the control side of things, because I saw there was a real disconnect there where people were making a lot of interesting music with modulars, but it was always keyboard driven.
Right.
In many ways. And I thought that seemed like a bit of a hindrance, because there was so much more, like there's so many more dimensions that you could control things with than just pressing and releasing keys. And especially if you want to have both your hands free to twiddle knobs.
Right.
It seemed like something you just, turn it on and then it does something interesting. And if you get tired of it, all you have to do is touch one of the controls and it can do something completely different.
Sure. Well, it's interesting that you talk about kind of going your own way, because that's a great segue into the next thing to talk about, which is the design of your own modular format. Now, while I really enjoyed working with your Eurorack stuff, that kind of floored me. I was like, my first reaction was like, well, that's a ballsy move. Right?
Well, maybe a bit crazy. I don't know. It's certainly it's not this. I don't know. I done a bunch of, well, not a bunch, a few. I did the pattern generator. I did the MIDI converter. I did dual VCO, which was probably the most ambitious design that I had done thus far.
That's an amazing looking thing. I never got a chance to touch one because I never found one in stock.
There's one more batch possible to build. It uses several chips that have recently become obsolete, unfortunately. But anyway, there will be some more sometime soon. And then I did a sequencer because, it's funny. It's like people ask for things but don't really want them sometimes. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, is that everyone thinks that something should have a certain feature, and this is what happened with the last sort of full Eurorack module that I did was the step sequencer, which is a little sequencer with an amber display, and it has all these different modes, and it's I thought I was giving people exactly what they wanted in terms of people were asking with the pattern generator, well, could it record? Right. Could it do these things? Like could I program the steps and can I do all these various things? And so I tried to offer a lot more detailed, sort of granular editing possibilities by doing this two-track sequencer. And although the people who got it really seemed to like it, it didn't really sell in the numbers that the pattern generator did. And I kind of think I know why now in hindsight, but at the time I kind of was a bit disappointed because it was a very ambitious firmware project to do all these features.
Sure.
And so, I was thinking of newer designs for Eurorack, and I had a whole bunch of things that I'd sort of drawn up. And I kept running into this problem where everything was a bit too cramped. Mm-hmm. And one comment I got about the dual oscillator from some people was they thought it was too big. Now, I can tell you after cranking out a lot of different revisions, it's very hard to make something good, especially in Eurorack, that, and you don't want to cramp the front panel. It's really difficult to give the right spacing, sort of human-sized.
Yeah.
And have it not take up a lot of space, because you only have, like, the PCB vertical width can only be like 4 1/4 inches total. And that includes, the borders and mounting screws and all that stuff. So, I kind of got frustrated, and I'd been thinking for a while, maybe I want to do something totally different so that I can really feel engaged when I'm doing a design, and I don't feel like I'm trying to design it to fit this tiny format with small connectors. And I don't really like mini jacks. I think they're bad.
Yeah.
So I sort of spent a long time, probably at the detriment to my finances and so on, is that I thought, okay, you know what? I'm just going to stop right now, and I'm going to think about this and work on this until I have something new. And I had been thinking about all sorts of different designs and I made a list of all the things I wanted to solve with a new format. And I know, it seems silly to like just make yet another format, but I'd done a version of the pattern generator for Buchla. Mm-hmm. So I got some time to play with a Buchla 200E system, and for you, I really liked the size of it. I liked banana jacks. There were things about it I didn't like, the way the power connectors worked and everything. So I kind of, from an electrical and a mechanical standpoint, I was like, I had all these ideas, and finally I sort of figured it all out to do this plug-in format. I don't know if you've seen how the modules work.
I've not.
In my format, but they basically just plug in with banana plugs on the bottom of the module.
Oh.
They plug into a chassis. There's no cables. There's no panel screws.
Oh, interesting.
It's literally a plug-and-play kind of system, and it solves some electrical problems. There's a bit more standardization on the voltages. It's bigger and easier to design, what I think, easier to design good panel layouts.
Right.
And so I sort of just put everything into that and said, I'm not coming out of this until I have something, and realized that obviously doing something new, I had to come out with at least enough modules to make a full system.
Right.
So I worked on 5 designs at the same time, which I would not recommend anyone ever do, because I was also developing the format at the same time. So when I would come up with a design change, like of something minor, like an electrical thing or a little mechanical thing, then I would have to go through all my designs and update everything.
Right.
Because I was working on them all in parallel. I literally ordered all the circuit boards at the same time. And it took months and months and months. I had a few false starts. Some stuff came back, didn't look the way I wanted. I changed things. I wasted a lot of time and money. And anyway, I finally, in 2012, in June, I released this new format. And although it hasn't sold very large numbers yet, the people who I've heard from really think it does a lot of things really well. And for me, it's kind of like, if I'm going to design modules from now until eternity,
right,
I want to be really happy with what I'm making.
Well, I think that's really important, because, I mean, first of all, unlike some of the other systems, there are a lot of people who have not had the opportunity to work with banana jack systems. Mm-hmm. I used to have a big surge system, and I loved working with, a system that was all banana. That it was just something, first of all, that everything about it seemed kind of right-sized, but also, like the surge, that for you height also somehow has a right feel. So you can do configurations that are like the old Mills College kind of curved systems and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And the width of them isn't so great that you're like having to extend your arms to work on it. It's just
exactly.
It's a very convenient height to work with. But banana jacks are fabulous. And I can see where it gives you more room to work. Now my question is, well, and you sort of basically said you wanted it to be something that you would feel good about doing for the rest of forever. Do you get a lot of negative feedback because it doesn't easily fit into other systems? I think of either a Surge or a Buchla type system. I would think that these people would kind of wave their arms around a lot.
It's funny, it's been the people who seem to not get it as much are the people who are sort of fully entrenched in the sort of the whole Eurorack thing, because there's so many manufacturers, so much choice, and obviously as a consumer that's a huge advantage. The people that like bananas seem to just like anything that's bananas. They're bananas for bananas. Like I don't. You probably read the Muff Wiggler forum, and
yes,
they have these dancing banana icons every time someone mentions bananas. But it's it really adding to that sort of landscape. I think people are supportive of, because they see maybe it's not 100% compatible with their system, I think it would be pretty much compatible with Surge, although I haven't tried it. Buchla has a lot of differences.
Yeah, Buchla's got issues there.
But yeah, I think generally people are supportive of something that's breaking new ground and trying to just make a better user experience. My biggest thing is I hope that more people will get on the bandwagon. I've released the specs for the system, so hopefully, and that was just this year because it took a long time to sort of compile all the information together and put all the drawings together, and I gave away free designs for the enclosure, panel layouts and things like that. So to hopefully encourage people to just jump on it and try to make some stuff.
Sure.
So that sort of thing takes time. Obviously, the people who are maybe a bit more business savvy than me are not going to just jump in there and just do it because the user base is pretty small at the moment. But I'm hoping in time people will, once the hype of Eurorack sort of settles down a little bit, I hope that people will maybe just think about giving it a try as designers or as modular enthusiasts too.
Right. Now, I mean, one of the things that kind of prevents that from happening easily is sort of this whole first user issue. So a lot of people, I'll tell you my track into the new version of analog. Because back in the day, I had a modular system and I had an Aries system.
Mm-hmm.
I had a Surge system and an Aries system and some others. Yeah, I love those systems, but also they were a nightmare to keep running. Right? They were just falling apart constantly. With the new stuff, I kind of came at it like, well, 5U stuff looks familiar, looks Mogish. I'm going to give that a try. And by the way, a neighbor of mine's got one, so I could kind of take it for a test drive first, right?
Sure.
And then another friend introduced me to the Eurorack stuff, which at first I was like, ooh, that seems so teensy-weensy. But, some of the many options that were available kind of drew me into that. I have not had a chance to lay my hands on a Kilpatrick format system, and so from that standpoint, it's kind of hard for me to generate sort of the internal excitement that it would take for me to get into the format. How do you how can you break through that when you come up with something this radically new?
It's interesting, and I've actually thought about that a lot. I'm a little bit sort of, maybe not a hermit in the true sense of the word, but I kind of do my thing, and I don't really care, what's going on in the other areas so much. Not like, obviously I follow what things are happening, but I kind of just do my own thing, and for me, whether people buy it or not is kind of like, obviously I'd like to sell more because it helps to support what I'm doing.
Right.
But at the end of the day, honestly, I was more interested in just doing something that I felt really strongly about, more of a long-term project of this sort of endless series of modules that I have on my to-do list. But recently, actually, I've started thinking more about, maybe I should go to these synth shows and do events and let people actually try stuff out, because that would be great to do. I think there's a level of confidence that comes after having done stuff and having things out in the wild for a little while.
Sure.
That at first I was really sort of nervous about, well, are people going to like this, or are they going to have problems with stuff? And it's, you can never anticipate every situation. And I think I've sort of been doing it for long enough now that I think I would feel good going and showing it, at some fairs and things like that. So that's, being in Canada, it's a little harder because we don't have a lot of that kind of stuff here. And traveling with a big synthesizer, on an airplane or something is maybe not my first choice of a fun thing to do.
Right.
But, that's something I am considering, especially with this new product that I've been working on, is it's so portable that, it's a natural that you would just take it somewhere and show people. So yeah, I am trying to get it out there more so people can get their hands on it. One thing I've held off on, which I'm considering, changing in the future, is dealers have asked about stocking it. And my biggest concern was, you really need to have all the modules available so people can like get a system right away and stuff like that, to sort of justify the dealer margin and stuff. Like, there needs to be a real value add. Obviously, the hands-on experience is, but I just wanted to be able to offer all of the products all the time. That's another reason why the modules are designed the way they are. And a big point that I forgot to mention before, actually, is that they're designed so I can build them one at a time. Unlike Eurorack, which I do surface mount parts, I send them away, maybe do 50 at a time or something like that.
Right.
And I started running into issues when I was doing Eurorack, is that new dealers would come on board and they would want to order a bunch of different things, or an existing dealer would want to reorder a whole bunch of things.
Right.
But
you almost couldn't afford to make the items that you needed to sell.
Exactly.
Right.
So and doing a production run is pretty expensive, and it takes, let's say, a few months before you have stuff ready for sale. Right. So I kept getting frustrated, and obviously building modules, I'm speaking probably in general terms, but I would say most people that make modules want to eventually offer a complete system.
Right.
Because you can have you have a Buchla, or you have a Surge. Like, I wanted people to have a Kilpatrick. Why not, right? It's like putting everything that I know and can afford into doing this. Why shouldn't they be able to have a newer name in the biz?
Right.
So for me, that kind of it was a stumbling block to try to figure out how can I offer all these products at the same time. So the format kind of lent itself to that, and I do the designs in such a way that I have a guy who helps me, and we build, let's say, 4 at a time, because it's easier that way. Right. And I stock all the components that I need to do pretty much all the models at any time.
Oh,
so that was a big deal for being able to offer something over a long term.
Yeah.
Like, to say, I want 1 of these, 2 of these, and 3 of these, or whatever, and to be able to actually say, yes, I can do that. So I've sort of held off on the sort of dealer sales of the system, but I'm getting to the point now, once I have, I think, maybe 2 or 3 more modules, I think it'll be well-rounded enough that I'll actually say, go to some of the resellers in the stores and say, hey, are you guys interested in taking this on? I mean, I know that some of them have already asked, but I just wanted it to be to the level where someone would come in there and try it and just be completely wowed with the amount of selection, especially if there were other manufacturers on board doing compatible things. Right. I think it would be really, then there becomes a whole infrastructure and a whole collection of products that you could choose from, and not just what I'm able to come out with.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And but also, it's kind of interesting to hear that part of your thinking and how you would build these was actually to create a system that wasn't immediately in danger of going away.
That's the biggest concern for me when I do any design, is how long are these chips going to be, or how long are these chips going to be available, or whatever it is. Usually it's chips, because they have the fastest obsolescence rate of any part. Right. So it's a huge concern, because especially with synthesizers, because there's nothing wrong with a design from like 10 or 20 years ago, but good luck building it, right?
Right. Yeah, I made the I can't say it that way, but I made the mental error of getting a whole bunch of Electronote stuff and saying, I'm going to dive in and just kind of DIY some stuff based off of that. And an enormous number of those circuits are unbuildable because you just simply can't find the chips.
Yep, it's true. And I kind of got stuck. I've had this happen before, where I got stuck with a part that just went obsolete after having been in production since the 1970s. Since the
dawn of time, yeah.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, just the way the industry goes and so on, now I just can't get it anymore. And so, I have some stocked up parts for certain modules and things that hopefully will last me for a while. But that's definitely something to try to minimize, is that when you put a lot of time and money into doing a prototype and doing a really time-consuming design, you want to be able to offer it for a while. So that was part of it as well, is to not sort of get a bunch of orders and go to do a run, and then like inevitably every time you build something, there's something you have to substitute just because it's not even it's gone, it's just maybe not in stock for like 12 weeks or something.
Yeah, right.
So it's part of the unfortunate business of electronics is that the industry moves really fast, and unfortunately the music side of things, there's a lot of advantages. We can draw on cool parts and technologies from other areas, but special purpose things made for music are few and far between these days. I'm sorry to say.
Well, there's that, and also way back when he got started, Grant Richter, in developing his wired system, kept on running into one problem, which was so much of the electronics industry is oriented towards massive quantities. It's almost like the concept of building cell phones.
Yep.
Just flipped the electronics industry on its head and said, well, now, unless you're talking about quantity 100,000, I don't even know how we can help you.
Exactly. It's a challenge. That's part of the challenge, I think, that anyone in any electronics related field is facing as a newcomer into the business. Is like, especially in synthesizers, where you want to use there's usually a lot of different types of components on the same circuit board, because it's not just a purely digital design. There's op amps and voltage regulators and specific control panel parts that you want them to feel a certain way and stuff like that. It's quantity, yeah, it's a big deal. That's another reason why I decided to build stuff as I go, is because I share a lot of the components between different designs.
Sure.
So when I buy banana jacks, let's say, I don't just buy enough for whatever people order. I buy 100 at a time or 200 at a time.
Right.
So to try to get those price breaks, but unfortunately it means that I have to keep them in my own inventory, which costs money.
Right.
So there's no real easy way about it. It's if you're doing larger quantities and you can do them in big batches and you can afford to do that, well then that's great. But not everyone has the means or the risks that wants to take those kind of risks to do that. Right. It's not even about affording it. It's like, okay, go borrow a bunch of money, and now you've got boxes full of boards that are tying up your credit line and stuff like that. So having been there, I feel much more at ease when I'm not working in that way, which is sort of why I ended up doing it the way I am.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Now, let's talk about this newest device that was just announced. It's funny because I reached out to you about doing an interview, and then like a couple days later, I see the announcement of the soon-to-be coming Phenol. Is that
Phenol? Yep.
Yeah, Phenol. Which, first of all, looks beautiful, and second of all, actually, kind of in some interesting way, looks like almost the next generation of your Kilpatrick format stuff, just put behind a set panel. Exactly. Tell us a little bit about what this is, first of all, and then secondly, what the design goal is with this versus the modules.
Well, I think that the biggest question that I get from people is, how much does it cost? Especially for people who are into modular synths. I think that I think that takes a certain amount of, deep pockets to want to and to be able to afford to do that. And I think people start to expect things to cost a certain amount and so on. But, I talk to a lot of people who really love synths and really love analog, patchable synths and so on, but they're not in the position for whatever reason to, shell out thousands and thousands of dollars.
Right.
I kind of felt badly about that. I kind of felt like I was, as much as I want to offer high quality modules, built, to high specs and so on, I kind of felt a little bit guilty as well that, am I making things that are like not accessible? So I started thinking about what could I do that would bring this sort of modular concept to as many people as possible. And I kind of, by a strange turn of events, I ended up working on this design kind of by accident. It was one of these things. It's like what we talked about before about the pattern generator. I had an accident in the summer, and I had a broken wrist. And I was trying to do some projects just to keep myself occupied. In the spare time, I wasn't soldering because I only had one hand available, and I started doing things like trying to figure out what can I do that's not going to drive me crazy with this, a short-term disability, I guess.
Right.
I was still working coding all day in the daytime, and I don't work there anymore, by the way. I was working for Akai M Audio for a while, doing like firmware basically. It got very monotonous, so I don't do that anymore. But I was trying to do something that would free up my bad hand to just relax. So the natural thing is using CAD, because you can do most of it with the mouse.
Right.
So I started just drawing up some ideas, and I kind of thought, I wanted a big enough project that would keep me busy for a little while. So I started just putting down some ideas, and I have this system of designing where I design everything in my electronics software, which is Eagle, by the way.
Right.
And I actually have special components that I made so that I can actually lay out the panel at the same time as the board. So I don't actually design products in a different program anymore.
Interesting.
So I can actually see how the whole panel is going to look. And also when I'm done it, all the control panel parts are actually on the board where they need to go.
Right.
So I can actually, it's really easy to move things around, and I use a special layer that doesn't get sent to the circuit board making people. So I actually just started messing around and trying to figure out what could I fit something. I was thinking about a sequencer for a while, and then I thought, no, you know what? It would be interesting to see how much could I bring the price point down of all these individual circuits in one box. That was the real thought behind it, because I don't know, you've built electronics, you probably know that the actual circuit components are not really the expensive part.
Right. It's the sheet metal,
it's all the stuff
connectors, knobs, and that stuff, right?
Yeah, power supplies, all the enclosure bits, all that stuff. So I thought, you know what, I think I could probably, it's like a little bit more bang for the buck to basically try to put a lot of these things into a single unit, but still make it really patchable as a regular modular synth. So I started working on a sort of stripped down designs. They're not designed to be like worse necessarily, but they're designed to obviously be more efficient in terms of panel space, parts count. I don't use any weird chips. So, it's a little bit more commodity components, and try to see, could I do a viable synth, patchable synth, using the same connectors and voltages and everything that I use on my Kilpatrick format modular. Could I put it in one box and sell it at a price that, if someone were wanting to get into synthesis, that they could hopefully afford?
Okay, so you're teasing us right there. When you say that, what is the dollar figure you're thinking of in your head?
Less than $1,000 for sure.
Okay.
The retail price I just announced the other day. For now, I'm hoping to get it even lower, but someday. For now, $849 is the number.
Okay.
Now, so I'm looking at starter systems, because a lot of people are like, oh, I want to get started. I think I'll just buy like one of these small starter system Eurorack systems. Usually they come with a little mini synth voice module or something like that, maybe a few utility modules, and a little power supply and things like that. There's a few different offerings at the moment. None of them really were something that I would feel like I would want to recommend to a friend, because I know that they would outgrow it really fast.
Right.
And as soon as they wanted to do anything more, they wouldn't want those anymore.
Right. So it ends up being, they end up replacing their entire first system.
Exactly. And so it seems like sort of throwaway kind of money.
Right.
And there's not a lot of resale value, I wouldn't think, for something that's like super entry level either. So, it doesn't seem like a good investment. So what I thought of is, well, it has to be good enough. Maybe getting rid of the modular concept helps to save some cost, because I know that enclosures and power supplies and rails and all that stuff are really expensive. No matter which way, I've sliced it several times, trying to make lower and lower cost Eurorack stuff, and I've done a project with a friend recently in that area to try to make an even lower cost way to get into Eurorack.
Right.
no matter which way you do it, it's still expensive.
Right.
So I thought maybe I just need to not do any of that and just make a standard desktop, 2 sheet metal parts. There's only like a small number of fasteners that hold the thing together. It feels solid, but it's not, doesn't have a ton of hardware. It's not all sorts of different parts fitting together and chassis and things, separate pieces inside. There's one circuit board, and the circuitry is on the bottom, and the control stuff is on the top. And, it's a little bit more integrated, so you can actually design stuff like that because you can fit things in between sections and stuff like that. It's a bit more of a challenging layout, but what you end up with is the bare minimum necessary to make something that's decent and is going to work really well.
Right.
So it was more of just an exercise to see, could I pull it off?
Sure. So you need to put out some more images of it so we can start drooling over the front panel. Mm-hmm. Because the one that's out there is kind of at an angle, and all I can do is guess, right?
I did publish an actual like a 2D drawing of like a panel layout, because a lot of people were asking me what are all the controls and everything. Sure. It's not 100% the same as, like, this is still a prototype,
right?
But it's like, let's say it's like 98% as it will be. Yeah, but yeah, I'll take some more photographs of it.
Cool.
I think the response has been absolutely insane. I've never, in the 4 years or so that I've been doing synthesizer stuff, I've never had so much interest in anything. It's like all the other things combined, I would say. It seems to speak to people in a way that, like, maybe it's I don't know, it's the price plus I think it's, people told me that they don't feel intimidated by it as they would with a big modular system.
Right. Well, and if you think about it, there's actually a fairly long history of what we would call semi-modular systems, mm-hmm. or patchable systems, going all the way back to everybody's heartthrob, the 2600.
Sure, of course.
2600.
Yep.
But, the Phoenix systems,
yep.
The MS systems, mm-hmm. all those things were like beloved by the people that had them, mm-hmm. because it seemed to tread between the complexity of a modular system, but sort of the friendliness of an all-in-one piece thing.
I think so.
There's another thing, though, that's really interesting about this, and interesting about the concept of a semi-modular or a patchable system, which is because it's a set of features, it means mm-hmm. that people that use them have a shared vocabulary.
Yes,
they
that's
have a shared
deal.
way to talk about their patch creation and the development of things. And that strikes me as really important.
Well, something I've been thinking of doing, and I haven't really figured out the best way of implementing it yet, is I want to start a section of my site where people can submit their patch ideas. Mm-hmm. Some sort of, I don't know whether it's like these like sort of scribble sheets where people can write down things, or they can take a photo of their setup with their patch and then upload it or something and describe it a little bit, or show different tips and tricks. I mean, maybe forums can sort of handle that, but I'd like sort of a more publicly facing way of sort of like the, sort of a dictionary, I guess, of different ideas, because I think the shared experience is something, I didn't think of it like that, the way you described it, but I like the way you described that, because I've often thought of that in terms of, if you want to have your own unique experience in modular, well, all you have to do is go out and buy all sorts of different Eurorack stuff, and you're probably not going to have the same system that somebody else has.
Or anyone else, for that matter.
Anyone else has, which is, I think that's kind of cool, but it's also not cool if you want to sort of like trade ideas with your friend, because maybe they don't have the same module that you have, and so on.
Right. Well, I think it's a brilliant idea, and I wasn't sure what your price point is, but at what you're talking about, that's really, really stunning. Now, this is going to all be compatible then with the Kilpatrick format, so people mm-hmm. who wanted to expand could then expand from this into that, right?
Mm-hmm. I almost see it like a dockable laptop or something.
Right.
It's like, if you want to take the essence of a patchable synth and take it to a gig, put it alongside maybe some sort of, more pre-programmed type of synths, then this is cool. But if you want to use it in your studio, it adds more functionality to maybe a larger system.
Right.
I've had a lot of people ask about compatibility with other systems. I haven't really decided if I can offer something else to make that easier, but the voltages are similar enough that you can probably make or get some mini jack to banana kind of cables,
right,
and go between different things as well. And one good thing that you probably know this, but a lot of people won't know this about bananas, is that it's probably the simplest way to do your own projects if people want to get into DIY, because you can put a little project box together with a funny circuit or something that you came up with in an evening probably, and it will look really good, and you can just patch it right in. It's it's lab centric.
Yeah, it is. Well, the other thing I always liked about banana jacks is that they sort of could always double as a probe, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you could just start sticking it in random circuits or whatever, and as long as you're not going to over voltage anything,
sure,
you can all of a sudden sort of. It's sort of like automagically doing circuit bending as part of your modular system.
Yeah, I went to my friend's studio the other day so he could try it out, and we shot some video for some demos and stuff. And he had this whole he was using the clock divider, and he was holding the 3 plugs in his hand, and he was alternating touching them to another one to get different polyrhythms going.
Right.
And I was like, oh, neat. Okay, he made his own switch box, which, why not, right?
Right, exactly.
and when I design circuits now, I use the things that I've built before as sort of like part of my test bench, really. My synth sits near my workbench, so I just run cables across to the other table.
Right.
And, clip alligator clips onto things and whatever. And that's a really great way to just try out ideas without having to have a full circuit finished.
Right.
Because, if you want to make a cool filter, well, you need a sound source. Or if you want to make some sequencer, maybe you need a clock or something like that. So I really hope that maybe this will open more people up into the sort of hacker maker thing, to start thinking about, not maybe making full huge synths from scratch, because I can tell you it takes a while, and but to start learning about how some of the stuff works and build their own from plans, or just come up with ideas. I really think that's that's an untapped thing that a small community of people are doing.
Right.
But I think there's a lot more potential for people to really get into it in that level.
Well, and I think it's kind of interesting. This is going to be the first really financially approachable banana system. And I think that people, when they get the opportunity to work with banana jacks and sort of like the built-in multiplying system that comes with it, but also the simplicity of connection and connection to the outside world, I think it's going to really open some people's eyes and maybe kind of create a little more desire in the entire banana-based system as well.
I really hope so. Yeah. Because I have a lot of respect for the Surge designs, but the cost and I've never had the opportunity to use the system, but I really think that those designs are great. And they kind of look like DIY a little bit, in that they're all sort of little mental ideas that have been put all together into a system, which is I must say that that is partly an inspiration for what I'm trying to do as well. But I really like the idea that you could come up with a lot of different parts and then put them into something that you call an instrument.
Right.
Because I think that there's more to it than just choosing the correct modules. Especially if you're new, you might not know what to choose, and you feel like maybe you've always made the wrong choice because you can't make your system do what you think you could make it do, or whatever.
Well, and this concept of an instrument is actually a really powerful thing. And it's one of the places where sometimes Muff Wiggler can kind of distract you or point you in the wrong direction, because you'll jump into the, Eurorack module section, let's say, and you'd be like, oh, everyone talks about the make noise maths, and a whole bunch of people were talking about the Borg filter, and a bunch of people were talking about this other oscillator, and those are obviously the best things. And when you pull them all together, they maybe don't sound so hot because they, the kind of range of activity on a knob on this device doesn't really match the range of activity of a knob on another module, and all of a sudden it doesn't have the sense of cohesive design that makes you feel like you're playing an instrument.
You know, that reminded me of something, which is probably why I ended up in the whole modular thing instead of doing things like controllers for computer and stuff like that. And I bought some of these sort of generic USB controllers, and I thought, wow, this is great. This is like so flexible. But as I started trying to pair them with like software on the computer, I realized that like I'm going to have to take a step back and really like figure out how I wanted to design this interface. And if I don't already know all the functionality or how to use it, I'm totally unqualified to do that.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
So like I need someone else to show me, which is why I think certain products like the Push and things like that are successful, is because they've sort of said, we understand the software because we made it. We think these are the kind of functions that would be really useful to have, and that's kind of, I think that, and Machine is a good example. Well, right. Where there's a marriage between the software and the hardware in a way that the designers who really know the intricate details are the ones putting it together. And I sort of see that, obviously the modular thing is super flexible. Obviously it works on a per module basis, but I think there's something to be said for doing it on an entire system basis as well, which is why I think the Surge is really interesting.
Right.
And a lot of the other semi-modulars where, the designer gives you all the parts that he or she thinks you'll need to get something really interesting happening, and hopefully, it speaks your language, let's say.
Right, yeah, and I think much like, in the guitar world, some people are really drawn to a Les Paul and other people are really drawn to Stratocaster.
Sure.
Some people are going to be drawn to the decisions that Rex is making on a Surge system, while other people are really drawn to Buchla's design methodologies,
sure.
right?
Sure. There's no one right answer, it's different strokes for different folks, right? But I really think I think a designer can give, and it makes me feel like I can give a lot more, sort of spending a lot of time figuring out what are all the parts, how could they go together, what's an interesting layout that sort of encourages people to explore things in a specific way. And those are all those, I'm not saying that I'm the world's expert on user interface design, but, you find things out as you're trying to put the pieces together, and you start to learn from using other things to how you're going to assemble all these parts and what features even to offer, which is interesting. That was a real big deal for me doing Phenol was, well, I have this much space. I sort of chose the size based on like, what's the size of like a larger laptop?
Right. That
was my sort of goal. I wanted to fit in a backpack, which means not rack mountable because that's too wide and you can't get the zippers done up at the top. I've tried that. Right. Taking effects processors to gigs and stuff. So it's like, it has to be that size. Okay, it's going to be about 4U because that's kind of like the size I like to work in vertically. What can I give people, and how do I divide it up so that it's clean and so that people can find their way around, and there's a lot of decisions that go into there. And, some people come along and say, well, I would move this here and I want to do this way. It's honestly, a lot of people say this. I don't know if it's a meme or something. It's like, it's because of reasons. This is the way it is. Right. It's like, I don't have the time to explain them all to you, and I've probably forgotten some of them, but there were reasons at the time that I did it. That is the reason why it's the way it is. So, so I hope that you like it. I take all comments into consideration, but sometimes, it turns out the way it is. It's art as much as design in some ways.
Absolutely. Well, boy, burn through that time in a hurry. It was fascinating discussion. One last question: When are we likely to see the Phenol available to the public?
Okay, so this is a little different than what I've done before in that it's a bit more ambitious in terms of a prototype and build. So I have to do it in quantity, which means I have to sort of sell some. I'm going to work on a Kickstarter campaign, which should be active hopefully soon. I'm just trying to finish all the video and all the stuff that you have to prepare for that.
Sure.
So I'm going to take orders probably starting, well, let's say early to mid-December at the very latest. And I think I'm going to sort of promise by June of 2015 that it'll be like in people's hands kind of a thing. If I can get it sooner than that, that would be awesome.
Right.
But there is still more work to do, and it's a larger undertaking than a module. So I don't want to let anyone be disappointed.
Well, that sounds really interesting, and I actually really appreciate sort of like the honesty of saying, this takes time, and this is going to, this needs to be done right. I mean, one of the things I think people look at if they look at the history of the work that you've done is you're pretty dedicated to doing things right. So I can appreciate that perspective. And dang, this looks like a really exciting system. So I'm anxious to get my little fingers on such a thing as well. Might have to come up to your neck of the woods and take your prototype for a test drive.
For sure, anytime.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your time again. Man, it was fascinating hearing you discuss so openly how you go through the design process, because I think that ends up being a thing that so often looks like frankly, it either looks like black magic or it looks like bullshit, and you can't ever know for sure which of the two it is.
It's hard to know. I mean, I treat everything as a serious project, regardless of whether it's my full-time job or it's something I'm doing for fun. I can't do like weekend projects very easily anymore because I always want to do the full design path through everything. But yeah, no, I want to make sure that I make it as good as I can, because people are spending money on it and I want them to enjoy it. That's really what it comes down to. I want people to enjoy the work that I do.
Well, I really appreciate the efforts that you're putting into it, and I hope that everyone gets a chance to lay their hands on some of your work, because I think it's fantastic. So with that, I want to say thank you again, and have a great evening.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye.
Bye now.
Thanks a lot to Andrew for joining us for the podcast. It was an awesome interview. Very friendly guy. For being a self-described hermit, seemed like he was totally comfortable talking to people. Thank you so much for listening again this week. Get a chance, check out what Andrew's doing with his Kickstarter program, and check out some of the modules that he's put together as well. Other than that, I want to thank you for listening, and hope that you'll catch us next week. Bye.